Come on, baby.
Can I start our video to see how I look? Can I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just don't turn the mic on yet.
So the mic is on. The December 17, 2021 special meeting of the Monroe County Legislature will now come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alcoffer.
Here.
Mr. Alcoffer is present. Mr. Ansello.
Here.
Mr. Ansello is present. Ms. Barnhart.
Here.
Ms. Barnhart is present. Mr. Baroff.
Here.
Mr. Baroff is present. Mr. Baines.
Here.
Mr. Baines is present. Ms. Boyce. I know she just joined.
Legislator Boyce?
Legislator Boyce, are you on here? We'll come back to her. Mr. Brew?
Here.
Mr. Brew is present. President Carbone?
Here.
President Carbone is present. Mr. Colby?
Here.
Mr. Colby is present. Mr. Delahanty?
Here.
Mr. Delahanty is present. Mrs. DeFlorio?
Here.
Mrs. DeFlorio is present. Mr. Dondorfer?
Here.
Mr. Dondorfer is present. Mr. Felder?
Here.
Mr. Felder is present. Mr. Flagler Mitchell?
Here.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell is present. Ms. Hasman?
Here.
Ms. Hasman is present. Mr. Hebert?
Here.
Mr. Hebert is present. Mr. Keller?
Here.
Mr. Keller is present. Mr. Keofit-Lassie?
Here.
Mr. Keofit-Lassie is present. Ms. Lamar?
Here.
Ms. Lamar is present. Mr. Lee? Saw Mr. Lee on here. Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Mr. Mafucci?
Here.
Mr. Mafucci is present. Mr. Marinetti?
Here.
Mr. Marinetti is present. Mr. Morelli?
Here.
Mr. Morelli is present. Ms. Roman?
Here.
Ms. Roman is present. Ms. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Smith is present. Ms. Taylor?
Here.
Ms. Taylor is present. Mr. Wilcox?
Here.
Mr. Wilcox is present. Ms. Wright?
Here.
Ms. Wright is present. Mr. Udelson?
Here.
Mr. Udelson is present. And then we'll go back. Ms. Boyce?
Carla just texted me. She can hear us. She's having some technical
having some-
issues,
all
but
right.
she's here.
I see her on here. Okay.
We will need to suspend the rules of the legislature for the purpose of prohibiting public in-person attendance. You have a motion before you, which is moved by legislator Brew and seconded by legislator DeFlorio. This is a non-debatable motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Please join me in a moment of silent prayer. Please stand as Legislator Rachel Barnhart will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Legislator Barnhart.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty
and justice
and
for all.
justice for all.
Thank you, Legislator Barnhart. I've called this special meeting of the legislature pursuant to the authority vested in me as president of the Monroe County Legislature by section C29C1 of the county charter and section 545-5 of the rules of the legislature of the county of Monroe. This meeting has been closed to the public and all legislators are participating via teleconference in keeping with the legislature's tradition of openness. The meeting is being live streamed on the YouTube through the legislature's official channel. Everyone participating via video or teleconference will please mute their devices except to obtain the floor or cast a vote. If seeking to obtain the floor, please simply state your name and wait for me to call on you before proceeding with your question or statement. The clerk will read the full title of each resolution and referral to avoid any confusion as to which item is before the legislature. All votes will be held via voice vote unless a roll call vote is requested. Today, we'll consider two items for adoption before the full legislature, items number 1 and 2. We will now hold the public forum. Mr. Clerk.
I'll now read the comments that were submitted for this evening's meeting. First, I had two comments that were submitted either during or after the meeting on December 9th, so I'll start with those two. The first comment is from David Ciofo. Please note, I approve the proposed district and the GOP plan in general. I apologize for presenting this via email as I planned on intending and approving in person, but unfortunately an issue arose that required my attention. Our next submission was from Michael Bleeg. County legislators, there are multiple proposed districts that I recommend be changed. The districts below are unnecessarily poorly shaped geographically, and I believe are divide and conquer across political lines. The poorly shaped districts include number 7, 16, 17, 23, 24, and 26. These districts should be revised before a redistricting plan is approved. Mike Lee. And then these are the submissions for today's meeting. My name is Angelo Carisi. I support the Republican plan for redistricting, which includes the town of Gates. We would like to have our legislator to continue to serve our district. It is in the best interest of the residents in the town of Gates to be represented by this plan. Thank you. Our next submission is Judith Bennett. After watching the recent legislature meeting on redistricting and tonight's NBN6 meeting, I am more than ever opposed to the proposed revised map that clearly splits neighborhoods apart. I don't understand why historical villages and neighborhoods would be separated when it's more important than ever to build communities in these trying times. Please help me understand your logic. Judith Bennett. Our next submission is from Rose O'Keefe. To the legislators, would you please update the map with clarity and fairness to all? Rose O'Keefe. Next submission is from Robert Meadows. Please help me understand how one street in the south wedge has in common with a neighborhood in Henrietta, New York. If we have a problem with loud bikes, would they even care? Is this your way to weaken and silence voters, citizens, veterans, business owners, parents, and taxpayers? Robert Meadows. Our next submission is from Jane Bleeg. I'm writing to express my deep concern and disagreement with the current redistricting process and the plan that has been proposed. This plan directly affects me as well as numerous people about who I care deeply who live all over the county. My concerns include: 1, the plan was rushed through when it didn't need to be, designed by partisan political interests, ignored the input from those who were not in alignment with the majority, and causes deep disgust for many with the integrity of government. This comes at a time when we need to cultivate greater, not lesser, trust in our government's ability to lead us with wisdom and integrity. 2, the plan breaks up neighborhoods, block curbs, and legislative districts in ways that have the potential to erase longstanding relationships and working partnerships among neighborhood and community leaders and followers, harming the ability of these caring, dedicated people on the ground and in leadership roles to help nurture their local communities and our community as a whole. 3, there was little attempt to secure meaningful input from residents. All that was done was surface, scheduled at times that were ineffective, either because plans had already been drawn or because the meetings were held in far off locations or at inconvenient times. I urge Adam Bello to veto this plan, to take the time needed to make up a much better one. We have until the end of February. There is no need to rush this current plan through except to meet the political agendas of those trying to remain in power. Jane League. Our next submission is from Mary Mickett. My name is Mary Mickett and I have resided in Monroe County for 46 years, the last 30 in Penfield. While my district is not changing, I wish to express my concern about the redistricting process. I believe the process has been rushed and the residents have not been given ample information or opportunity to comment. And the comments made do not appear to have been considered in finalizing the maps. While meetings have been held, there has been little advance notice. The currently proposed maps were only submitted to the legislature by the redistricting committee on November 28. It appears that the legislature is preparing to vote on the maps on December 16. The legislature has until February 28 to vote on the new maps, so why is there such a rush? As a county resident, I hate to think that the vote is being scheduled so that the current legislators will be deciding maps versus those elected in November. Those types of political games are why so many people do not trust our government and do not participate in the process. I am requesting that the maps be made more widely available and that additional comments and discussions occur in January and early February. This will allow the county residents to provide additional input and better understand the impacts, and will also lead to better community acceptance of the maps. Mary Mickett. Our next submission is from Mike Bleeg. My concerns about the proposed redistricting is that at least 6 of the proposed districts are designed in very odd ways. I don't know whether this is a type of gerrymandering, but it seems so. The specific districts are number 7, 16, 17, 23, 24, and 26. We live in District 24. The change since the previous district map is significant. This is also true for a number of other districts. I recommend that County Executive Adam Bello veto this plan and create another redistricting team to provide a new plan no later than mid-February. Input from various neighborhood groups would be Mike Bleeg. Our next submission is from John Keevert. I'm a resident in County Legislature District 23. I disapprove of the proposed changes to LD 23. Since the new district would require the legislator to represent the interests of residents of 3 different municipalities, the city of Rochester, Brighton, and now Penfield. While not too heterogeneous, I think it likely that there will be numerous instances when the priorities of the 3 municipalities will be in conflict, and it will be structurally impossible for the legislator to be a good representative. Sharing sales tax revenue is one example. Please reconfigure LD 23 to make it possible for the legislator to do her or his job. John Keeper. Our next submission is from Bob Thompson. Unfortunately, the Monroe County Legislature is planning to bring a final vote on redistricting without utilizing an open, honest process to produce the proposed redistricting map. The last legislature meeting on this subject did little more than illustrate the lack of public input and backroom dealing. Legislator Flagler Mitchell last minute proposed amendments that were submitted are difficult to view online and were entirely inappropriate in that there is no real opportunity for public input that would make any meaningful change. The proposed redistricting map continues to divide neighborhoods, generally does not follow geographic boundaries of the various towns and city, and has done little to incorporate the in-person and written feedback received during the limited open comment periods. I urge the legislature to vote no and not accept the proposed redistricting map. Furthermore, should the map be accepted, the county executive should veto the map and insist that an open, equitable process be followed to ensure the true public input. Bob Thompson. Our next submission is from Judy Hay. I urge a no vote on the proposed redistricting map due to failure to address significant community input. The most flagrant example was the last-minute backroom deal at the legislative hearing proposed new city district lines without public input. Even the majority of the legislature had not seen the last-minute map changes. That undermines the democratic process of fair representation and community trust in the legislature and the legislative process. Repeatedly throughout the process, the Southeast has raised the issue of the South Wedge being split into 2 districts, LD 25 and LD 24, and asking that it be untied with the rest of NB N6 area in LD 24. That request was never acknowledged in the maps, either in the backroom last-minute deal or the previous maps. Splitting towns like Sweden, Brockport, and East Rochester, for example, does nothing to promote community unity on key issues. The same lack of concern for community unity to address issues is seen in splitting city neighborhoods. There's a theme in this process: split towns, villages, and city neighborhoods so the citizens can't affect real change to the systems. Promoting communities of common interest should be a key platform in the redistricting process. If the legislature votes affirmatively on the proposed maps, I urge the county executive to veto the redistricting maps and open up a more fair bipartisan process with public input. Judy Hay. Our next submission is from Bruce Mellon. I'm very disappointed that both my last letter was not read for the record before last week's redistricting vote, nor was it considered. I'm hoping that previous letter is read as well as this one. The district gerrymandering for personal, caucus, party, partisan interests is obvious and needs to stop and be kept out of the process and map. The redistricting process has been corrupted and needs to start over. Keep together neighborhood and municipal communities of common interest. Do not cross municipal boundaries to the extent possible. And the map should show 8 legislative districts within the city of Rochester that avoid splitting neighborhoods. Unbiased redistricting is not rocket science, but it takes a map maker following established state redistricting guidelines that are not politically swayed. I, as a leader of neighborhood organization presidents, as well as president of the Upper Mount Hope Neighborhood Association, propose something more similar to the map to this link below, where the districts are compact and attempt to keep neighborhoods together to the extent possible when retaining populations plus or minus 2.5% of 26,188 within each of the 29 districts. I strongly urge you to vote no on this, to vote no, veto this map, and start the process over. There is time. Bruce Mellon. Our next submission is from Silvano Orsi. The Little Italy Historic District is a well-defined neighborhood district with very specific borders detailed in the attached City Council proclamation. Our neighborhood has now attained national recognition as a historic Italian enclave by the Italian Enclaves Historical Society. Therefore, the city-county map should reflect our exact and accurate borders, please, which are located in both the southwest and northwest quadrants of the city. They are currently not accurately indicated on the city map nor on the city's website. Our specific borders are from State Street to Broad Street running east-west, and from Lorimer Street to J Street running north-south, as in the attached City Council proclamation and street map of Little Italy. Please update the city-county maps and websites to show the map and our accurate borders. We work closely with the adjacent Lyle Otis Neighborhood Association led by Mike Vasanti. The district map, the district gerrymandering for personal caucus party partisan interests needs to stop and be kept out of the process and map. The redistricting process has been corrupted and needs to start over. Keep together neighborhood and municipal communities of common interests. Do not cross municipal boundaries to the extent possible. And the map should show 8 legislative districts within the city that avoid splitting neighborhoods. Silvano Orsi. Our next submission was from Paul Miner. After looking at the last publicized maps, it is hard to understand how the redistricting committee came up with some of the boundaries for many of the legislative districts, such as 3, 5, 6, 7, 12, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, 20, 23, 24, 26, 28, to name a few. I listened in to your last hearing on December 9, 2021, and clearly heard a message of amazement, discontent, and distrust in the process, not just my own neighborhood, the South Wedge, but Brockport, Sweden, Henrietta, Pittsford, and elsewhere. The comments from these callers or writers all had specific comments and complaints, especially in holding communities, NBNs, town centers, core businesses, communities of color, and other functioning coalitions meant to improve their communities with the help of a single legislator. The comments from those few in support of the proposed redistricting maps were universal in their support, liking the map, but stating no positive impact on their community or other reason to approve. Hardly a ringing endorsement of the proposed changes. What is as troubling to me is the process. Few public hearings for input, lack of response to comments at those hearings, a lack of transparency, and shutting out the minority party from decision-making. To take a final vote on the maps proposed, even with subtle tweaks, is undemocratic and the reason voters are livid with the system. Backroom deals don't cut it today. Why should legislators who have been voted out of office be voting on a gerrymandered county the voters will have to live with for the next 10 years? There is absolutely no reason that redistricting of Monroe County cannot be postponed until after January 1st, 2022, based on maps representing the will of the people. That was Paul Miner. Our next submission is Carol Santos. I cannot understand most of these decisions about drawing a line that is clearly drawn to split neighborhoods and thus their representation. A child could draw more effective districts. Neighborhoods must be represented intact, otherwise their voice will be lost. Or perhaps this is the intention. Carol Santos. The next submission is from Lisa Reagan. My name is Lisa Reagan. I'm commenting regarding redistricting in the Monroe County Legislature. I ask that the proposed map, which splits many city neighborhoods, including mine, into different districts, not be voted on until the proposed maps have been revised in light of public input like that of our neighborhood association and with more opportunity for the public to comment and consideration. These comments follow previous testimony submitted to the Redistricting Commission, which was not only ignored, but the problems raised were made worse by the proposed map. I have been active in the South Wedge Planning Committee for decades and co-facilitate Neighbors Building Neighborhoods Sector 6, an active umbrella neighborhood group in Southeast Rochester that includes 6 neighborhoods: the South Wedge, Upper Mount Hope, Lilac, Highland Park, Swilberg, and Azalea, with the Reverend Judy Hay. For decades, NBN 6 has met monthly to discuss issues affecting our joint neighborhoods and work together to address those issues. NBN 6 works to plan our joint goals. We try to support healthy and diverse neighborhoods run by residents. 5 of the neighborhoods in NBN 6 are in Monroe County Legislative District 24. The South Wedge, my own neighborhood, is the largest of the neighborhoods. It is unhelpfully split between LD 24 and LD 25. This makes it difficult to identify common issues and have adequate representation both as a neighborhood group in 2 different legislative districts and as part of NBN 6, the rest of which is entirely in LD 24. Further, the Genesee River is a natural and historic neighborhood boundary recognized in most city districts. Causing a district to cross a boundary like the river is contrary to the requirements of geographic identity and unnecessarily splits. That was Lisa Reagan. Our next comment is from Glynis Valenti. I write on behalf of the South Wedge Planning Committee, a nonprofit neighborhood preservation company serving Southeast Rochester for 40 years. We are strongly opposed to the amended maps, which continue to split our small neighborhood into 2 districts, and we recommend a no or veto tonight. It's very concerning that representatives elected by us appear to be disregarding an established process that involves public participation and worse, disregarding our time and voices. Crossing the Genesee River, the new map widens LD 25 farther into the South Wedge, splitting it in half. For LD 24, the proposed map downsizes the South Wedge and extends into pockets of downtown Brighton and Henrietta. The South Wedge is not a community of interest for Cornhill, downtown, or suburbs, nor is either legislative district compact and contiguous. We recommend that the entire South Wedge remain intact in LD 24 with our collaborators and take the natural dividing line of the Genesee River be utilized as the eastern boundary of LD 25. Only this configuration makes sense when working on neighborhood strategic planning and advocacy. Regarding this process, we are disappointed at best from the appointed legislative committee's utter lack of transparency and cooperation in developing these maps, to ignoring community input that clearly wants to keep communities cohesive, and finally to the appalling display of a meeting on Thursday, December 9, where some legislators tried to maintain order and find straight answers to their questions, while others looked bored and answered in circles, voting predictably. We ask respectfully that you consider the ramifications of illogical division when communities need to come together more than ever. Glynis Valenti. Our next submission is Rosemary Shaw. As an organization, one of our many goals is to bring the priorities of the community to the forefront when there are governmental decisions being made that will affect this neighborhood. In the case of the current redistricting effort, we would suggest that the entire Charlotte community be included in one legislative district. The goal would be to have the entire neighborhood represented by one legislator who could listen and understand the needs of the neighborhood as well as represent the entire community. Obviously, with the current layout, the 2 districts on our far north, which are currently LD 7, perhaps should be included in the LD 20 in the 26th. But at the same time, we would not necessarily want districts further to the south moved from the 26th to another LD. It is our hope that you will be able to find a way to have the entire Charlotte neighborhood included in one legislative district. This would provide continuity of contact for any issues that come up and provide the ability for the legislator to create a good working relationship with the entire neighborhood. Rosemary Shaw. Our next submission is from Judy Weinstein. I would like to have been able to thank you for this opportunity to address the legislature. Unfortunately, as is the entire redistricting process, those in charge did their best to keep members of the public from voicing their opinions. This body met on December 9th in a special meeting called for the purpose of holding a public hearing on the redistricting proposal submitted by the Legislative District Revision Commission, followed by its adoption. Because an amendment to the proposal was made and approved, the adoption had to be postponed for 7 days. When a legislator questioned about or whether a hearing would be held before the adoption of the amended maps, President Carbone replied that a hearing was not required but would be held. He went on to say legislators and the public will be informed at least 1 week in advance. The final words of the legislature's December 14 meeting were adjourned until December 17 at 5 p.m. I assume that is when the hearing and vote on adoption will take place. I am writing this on December 16 at 5:30, less than 24 hours before the hearing may take place. Thus far, the December 17 meeting is not on the county legislature webpage, not listed with the agendas, or even buried in the link that says legal notices. So much for informing the public at least 1 week in advance. We are all familiar with the old philosophical question: if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around, does it make a sound? I would like to ask President Carbone a paraphrase of that question. If you hold a public hearing and don't inform the public, is it a public hearing? Judy Weinstein. Our next submission is from Jack Motley. I have lived in the city of Rochester at the same address for 34 years. I'm writing to protest against the proposed redistricting map, and in particular against the proposed changes to my district, LD 23. The entire process for this redistricting has been mishandled, and the rushed attempt to ram through this travesty is a clear attempt by an outgoing majority party to gerrymander themselves back into power at the next election. This is obviously being done in this way in the hope that no one will notice and that it can be just swept in with all the other trash being carried out at the end of the year. My district, LD 23, is being expanded greatly to the east to now include suburban areas all the way out to Penfield High School. To call this anything remotely resembling rational is ludicrous. It is a blatant attempt to move a solidly Democratic district into the Republican ranks. I call on all members of the county legislature and the county executive to do their duty as elected officials, not as party hacks, and to put the drawing of district lines into the hands of less partisan people who will be as fair as possible. Then to approve those plans. To repeat the well-used phrase, voters should pick their representatives instead of representatives picking their voters. Jack Motley. Our next submission is from Sarah Aguglia. I have followed this process from the start and feel the commission has done a very good job. I have looked at the new lines and feel they are more than fair and, most important, legal. Thank you to the Redistricting Commission. Keep up the good work. Sarah Aguglia. Our next submission is from Tony Proietti. I feel as though the redistricting is fair, and if given the chance, the Democrats in the legislature will gerrymander those districts to their advantage. Tony Proietti. Our next submission is from Melanie Bernhard. According to CDC, the death rate for children under 19 from COVID-19 is statistically 0%. Therefore, children are not warranted to be vaccinated. According to CDC, not one healthy child has died of COVID-19 in the U.S. All children who have died from COVID-19 as of June 2021 had underlying comorbidities. Therefore, healthy children should not be vaccinated. According to CDC, the COVID vaccines will not prevent infection or transmission of COVID-19. Therefore, the vaccines are not effective. According to CDC, vaccinated people are not less infectious than unvaccinated people. Vaccinated people acquire and transmit COVID-19 just as easily and as often as unvaccinated people. Therefore, the vaccines are not effective. According to CDC and FDA, COVID vaccines pose risks of myocarditis, blood clotting, neurological damage, and death, to name a few, predominantly in adolescents. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. According to Vaccine Adverse Effects Reporting System, excluding foreign reports, 9,136 deaths were reported in the U.S. between December 14, 2020 and December 3, 2021 in America. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. According to the World Health Organization, there have been at least 2,457,386 adverse events worldwide. This is over 1 million more cases than all adverse events reported over the last 53 years of all vaccines administered since 1968 combined. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. Our next submission is from Jackie Holtzman. And it's a FOIL submission to the State Department of Health. This letter responds to your Freedom of Information Law FOIL request of October 12, 2020, which you requested copies of all records which indicate the efficacy, pro-con of wearing masks, face coverings by the general public is an effective method of stopping the spread of infectious disease such as influenza or COVID-19, or B, any safety risks associated with the long-term wearing of masks.
Point of order, Mr. President.
Yes.
I don't know if this is proper, but I'm asking a question, Legislator Boyce, as to are these proper submissions with regards to the redistricting process?
As far as I understand, Legislator Boyce, we're supposed to read all the submissions,
Correct.
just like at the regular legislature meetings. They could be all over the board.
Yep.
But thank you for your comment.
Please be advised that after conducting a diligent search, no records responsive to your request have been located. That was from Jackie Holtzman. Our next submission was from Marcia Reaver. I'm writing to oppose the passage of the amended legislative redistricting map. The new maps violate the principles of nonpartisan redistricting. The maps further crack and pack most legislative districts, dividing and diluting the voices in the neighborhoods, towns, and villages of Monroe County. Specifically, the South Wedge is even further divided between LD 24 and LD 25, with a greater portion of our neighborhood now assigned to LD 25, a community divided by the Genesee River from the South Wedge, and not a neighborhood of common interests. People on both sides of the river are opposed to the inclusion of any portion of the South Wedge in LD 25. I respectfully request the legislature send the amended map back to the Redistricting Commission with instructions to hold open meetings publicized on the legislature's website with instructions on accessing the public meetings and submitting public comments and citizen proposed maps. I further ask that the Redistricting Commission consider all testimony and the guiding principles set forth by the state when they redraw maps, joining together communities of common interests into compact districts. Our next submission is from Julie Donahue. For decades, the field of public health has researched the use of fear as a tool to manipulate people into action. The use of that tool has now been perfected and implemented against the people of the world with COVID-19. Evidence of this knowledge can be found in a CDC presentation, other DHHS materials, and in numerous academic journals. The intentional use of fear to sow hate, division, and discord is unethical and unacceptable and must stop immediately. The reality is that COVID-19 has a 99% plus recovery rate in most of the population, and approximately a 94% recovery rate is in the most vulnerable. Compare this to the original SARS, which had approximately a 9% case fatality rate, and the original MERS, which had over a 30% case fatality rate. We did not lock down, mask, or even widely acknowledge these diseases when they were prevalent, despite the fact that they had similar rates of spread to COVID. The COVID shots are also ineffective. A recent Department of Defense document stated that 71% of new cases of COVID-19 in the Medicare population are in fully vaccinated individuals, and 60% of hospitalizations are the fully vaccinated. The same document also stated that injections are even less effective in North American natives, Hispanics, and Blacks. The document apparently was unconcerned with political correctness. If the vaccines do not stop the spread, do not stop hospitalization, alter our genes, and have not existed long enough for long-term testing, why are we attempting to violate people's inalienable rights by forcing them? That was Julie Donahue. Our next submission is from Sarah Doley. The Republican team, along with the community, created maps that not only meet the New York State redistricting laws, but also represent fair and equitable legislative districts for the future. I have confidence in this process. Sarah Doley. Our next submission is Jane Maggio. According to the CDC, the death rate for children under 19 from COVID-19 is statistically 0%. Therefore, children are not warranted to be vaccinated. According to CDC, not one healthy child has died from COVID-19 in the US. All children who have died from COVID-19 as of June 2021 had underlying comorbidities. Therefore, healthy children should not be vaccinated. According to CDC, the COVID vaccines will not prevent infection or transmission of COVID-19. Therefore, the vaccines are not effective. According to CDC, vaccinated people are not less infectious than unvaccinated people. Vaccinated people acquire and transmit COVID-19 just as easily and as often as unvaccinated people. Therefore, the vaccines are not effective. According to the CDC and FDA, COVID vaccines pose risks of myocarditis, blood clotting, neurological damage, and death, to name a few, predominantly in adolescents. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. According to the Vaccine Adverse Effects Reporting System, excluding foreign reports, 136 deaths were reported in the United States between December 14, 2020 and December 3, 2021 in America. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. According to the World Health Organization, there have been at least 2,457,386 adverse events worldwide. This is over 1 million more cases than all adverse events reported over the last 53 years of all vaccines administered since 1968 combined. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. According to the American Heart Association, the mRNA vaccines dramatically increase inflammation of the heart. Therefore, the vaccines are not safe. According to historical medical data, 50%. It was Jane Maggio. And our last submission is from Carmen Vitali. I have been a resident of Monroe County for over 40 years. I am hoping that the work-in process will result in fair and equitable districts for that also meet New York State redistricting laws for all of the voters in Monroe County. It is also my hope that results will be used for years to come too. Thank you for allowing me to provide my concerns and comments. Carmen Vitali.
That's it?
Point of order, Mr. President.
Yes?
Thank you. Mr. President, municipal home rule law, this has to do with our upcoming agenda. Section 20, Chapter 4 requires that any local law be, quote, in its final form and upon the desks or tables of the members of the legislature at least 7 calendar days, exclusive of Sunday, prior to its final passage. I and at least 8 other members of the legislature were sent the final form for this proposed local law coming up only yesterday afternoon. And briefly displaying the amended text on the remote meeting platform during the December 9 meeting is manifestly insufficient to meet the requirements of the municipal home rule law. And the legislators did not have any amended text in their possession to properly review until yesterday. This vote is neither morally right, nor does it pass the minimum legal requirements set forth in New York state law, and is therefore in violation of our charter. We should not lift this from the table tonight. I would suggest we amend the agenda to exclude 1 and 2 items. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Baroth. We have 2 separate attorneys on the line with a different opinion. Could we please have the parliamentarian's opinion first?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Legislator Baroth, for that question. Through the President, I've reviewed Municipal Home Law Rule Section 20, Sub 4, and I believe this meeting and all the actions contemplated this evening are compliant with that section.
If may I ask, based on what? You believe it's based on what?
Thank you, Legislator Baroth. And through the President, let's walk through this for a minute. The first paragraph of that section, the second sentence rather, states that the local law shall be in final form and on the desks of the members at least 7 days in advance. I don't think the 7-day portion of that provision is a question, but my understanding of the law is that the proposed local law was in fact introduced a week ago yesterday via the Zoom meeting. Given the unusual circumstances of Zoom meetings and virtual meetings, there are no actual desks or tables of the legislators simply because we're meeting remotely. So it's my understanding of the law that introduction of the amendment a week ago yesterday was the equivalent of placing the local law on the desk or table of the legislators that evening a week ago yesterday. And further, all legislators were present a week ago yesterday. I went through the Zoom meeting and all 29 of the legislators were there. And further, as the legislators were presumably aware, the meeting last week was recorded on the legislature's YouTube channel, and the substance of the meeting, including the substance of the proposed amendments brought last week, were available for review by the public and the legislators on the YouTube channel.
Mr. President, the chapter, section and subsection, the parliamentarians referring to also includes provisions that in place of the tables can be an email. There's no mention of Zoom or YouTube channels. Clearly, there was an avenue to provide this to us even in these difficult times. That's called an email. And in fact, the minute we made it clear that there's a challenge here and an interest, we weren't sure we actually had the right stuff. Within 45 minutes, we got it via email correctly. The fact of the matter is, this local law was not made available in its final form to members of this body, at least 9 of them, perhaps all of them, I do not know. And therefore, we cannot debate this and pass this until a week from essentially today, because you're not supposed to do it on Sundays either. And so again, I suggest to the president that he needs to change the agenda so we do not violate the charter. Regardless of what the parliamentarian says, he's not a lawyer.
Yes, he is a lawyer, Mr. Legislator.
Through the president, thank you, Legislator Baroff. Yes, I am an attorney.
Congratulations. My apologies.
I've been admitted over 40 years.
My apologies. I did not realize you're an attorney. I think you're wrong, but I did not realize you were an attorney.
Are you an
Again,
attorney, Legislator Baroff?
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear you.
Are you an attorney?
Oh, no.
So you're disagreeing with our attorney and you're not an attorney?
I'm disagreeing with the parliamentarian who happens to be an attorney. I believe you mentioned 2 other attorneys had actually discussed this with you somehow. Are they at the meeting to discuss this point?
I don't know if they're at the meeting. Is there any other attorney on this meeting that would like to chime into this?
President Fusco, I am present in this meeting.
Do you have an opinion on this, Attorney Fusco?
Through you, Mr. President, with regard to your question, Mr. Broth, I would echo the sentiments of Mr. Partyjack and what he just advised as his legal opinion on this matter. And just to reiterate that, while I understand your reading of the general municipal law, what you have here is a matter that was introduced before the entirety of this legislature on a Zoom meeting, which is archived for public consumption on the legislature's YouTube channel. As a matter of fact, just before this meeting took place, I did in fact go back to that YouTube archive and rewatch that meeting to make sure that in fact all of the maps and local law that is being considered before this legislature tonight was in fact produced during that meeting and available for legislators and the public's consumption. I was able to access that link and was able to see those maps and review that local law. In addition, the second thing I would add to that is that this proposal was also posted to the county's website in the requisite 7-day period. So not only is it archived via the video with all of the legislation and maps there for public viewing, but also on the county's website, there's a link with not only the local law, but also the color picture maps, which any individual, be they the common public or the 29 members of this body, can access, zoom into, and look into. So with that, I would concur with the sentiments of Mr. Partyjack, which is that this proposal and these maps were in fact properly on the desks of these legislators and satisfy any notice provisions regarding the 7-day period that you refer to, Mr. Broth.
Mr. President, this is the county attorney. May I weigh in?
If Legislator Broth will agree.
Yes, I'd like him to do that.
Go ahead, Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, just to comment on Mr. Partyjack and Mr. Fusco's points. I don't believe that posting the local law on YouTube or rather having to somehow pause the local law on YouTube and scroll through and hope that you catch the text is a valid method of transmission under the municipal home rule law. The text of the local law was not in fact posted on the county website. It wouldn't have been a valid method of providing it to the legislature even if it was, but it's not posted. The local law was not in the hands of the legislators until yesterday. So my view is that there is a substantial risk that this local law would be viewed by the courts as not rightfully passed, just like Niagara County's redistricting local law was struck down by the courts some years ago.
I think that Niagara County was a complete scenario. Okay, so we have two different legal opinions. We're going to go on with the meeting, and if there's litigation to follow, I'm sure a judge will decide which attorney is correct.
Does that mean you're overriding my point of order, sir?
Yes.
I'd like to appeal that, please.
Okay, let's go to a roll call vote. Yes upholds the ruling of the president.
Yeah, you need a second on that.
Oh, you need a second.
Yep.
Second. Oh,
Oh,
remove
no.
my second.
Who was that? Who's
Is
second?
it the second to go to vote?
No, this is to
No.
appeal the rule.
No, we need a
of-
second for Legislator Baroth's appeal.
Legislator Roman seconded it.
Gotcha.
I thought Legislator DeFlorio. Roman seconded it, but Legislator DeFlorio.
Someone. Okay. Yes sustains the rule of the president. Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart, excuse me.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroth.
No.
Mr. Baroth votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahanty.
Yes.
Mr. Delahanty votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell. Mr. Flagler Mitchell, are you muted?
Legislator Flagler Mitchell, are you on?
I'll come back. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Flagler Mitchell's in, he voted yes.
Got it. Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keough-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keough-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci.
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
Yes.
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson.
No.
Votes yes. Mr. Udelson.
No.
President Carbone.
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. Rule of the president is sustained 20-9.
We'll now proceed with the local laws. Will the clerk read the next item on the agenda, please?
Item number 1, referral 21-0482, providing that local law intro number 556 of 2021, entitled Amending Monroe County Charter and Administrative Code Relating to Legislative Redistricting and Term of Office of Members of County Legislature, as amended by motion number 151 of 2021, be lifted from the table.
Move it, Mr. President.
By legislator, seconded by legislator DeFlorio. This is a motion.
Second.
Who else seconded that?
I think it was.
That was Legislator Boyce.
Thank you,
Yes.
legislator. Legislator Boyce also
Got it.
seconded. This is
Mr.
a
President, I'd like to second it as well, please.
Legislator Alcoffer also.
Elcoff, yes.
This is a motion to lift from the table. All in favor, please say aye.
No.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
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 Okay,
Roll call.
take it easy. Take it easy. We'll go to a roll call vote.
This is the motion to lift from the table. Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroth.
No.
Mr. Baroth votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahanty.
Yes.
Mr. Delahanty votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keough-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keough-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes.
Yes.
Mr. Mafucci.
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson. Did we lose Mr. Udelson?
Legislator Udelson, are you
No.
muted? No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone.
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes.
No.
Motion to lift from the table passes.
Item, Mr. Clerk.
Item number 2, referral 21-04. Item number 2, referral 04.
Wow.
Providing that local law intro number 556 of 2021 entitled Amending Monroe County Charter and Administrative Code Relating to Legislative District Boundaries and Term of Office of Members of County Legislature, amended by motion number 151 of 2021 be adopted.
Move it, Mr. President.
Moved by Legislator Hebert, seconded by Legislator DeFlorio. This is to adopt. I'd also like to inform the legislators that Attorney Fusco is available for any questions. Is there any discussion on this?
Legislator Baines.
Hebert.
Legislator Hebert is the mover. He'll go first. Go ahead.
Right.
Thank you, Legislator Baines. Through you, Mr. President, a few comments and then some questions. First of all, the amended maps as presented make very few changes to the previously proposed maps from earlier this month and from the existing 2010 maps. In the worst case, less than a quarter of the residents in the proposed new districts are in fact new to the said district. In the 2010 map, there were 6 majority-minority districts. In the proposed map, there are 7 majority-minority districts. I'd like to also point out that the existing maps were called gerrymandered at the time of their adoption in 2010. Yet a study conducted jointly by the local League of Women Voters and the Center for Governmental Research conducted and reported out in April of 2011 found that was not the case at all. In fact, the study drew 2 sets of maps that were new on their own, starting from scratch, and the second based on the ones that were drawn, and the distribution of seats between the parties was in fact identical. Through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Fusco, at the December 9th meeting, all legislators were informed of their opportunity to talk to you or Mr. Ciampoli, to ask questions, make suggestions, etc. My question is, did any of the members of the Democratic caucus contact you or the mapping firm since then?
Thank you, Mr. Hebert. Since this legislature had passed the referral to retain my firm, my law office number, fax number, email, cell phone has been made available to each and every one of the 29 members of this legislature currently present at this meeting. Unfortunately, not only since December the 9th, but also before December the 9th, in any time relevant subsequent to the meeting of the Independent Revision Commission on November the 30th, I've not heard or been contacted by any of the legislators that comprise the Democratic minority of this body.
Thank you, Mr. Fusco. Through you, Mr. President, once again to Mr. Fusco. You promised during our December 9th meeting to deliver the amended maps to the clerk no later than the 10th of December. When were the maps sent? The revised maps, the amended maps?
Yeah, so Mr. Hebert, the amendment you refer to on December the 9th was made essentially in real time following many of the comments made by the public during the public forum and also by following input of individual legislators, again, that comprise this body. Through this process, not only myself, but Mr. Champoli and our cartographer, Mr. Schaefer, have listened intently to the input of the public, have certainly followed the news media and any of the comments made there, and then also have been more than willing to meet and speak with any of the individual legislators who wish to have any input in this matter. And case in point, during the meeting on December the 9th, certain concerns were raised and amendments were made to the proposal, and maps were redrafted, revised, and the local law amended that very evening. Mr. Hebert, on December the 9th, later that evening at roughly 6:30 p.m., the revised local law and maps were transmitted to the clerk of this legislature. And as promised, color expanded maps in the 11 by 17 format and the 34 by 44 format, which is much easier for the legislators and the public to review, were transmitted to the clerk of this legislature early in the morning of December the 10th.
Thank you, sir. Through you, Mr. President. At the December 9th meeting, the legislators were told the amended maps would be posted the next day. To the clerk of the legislature, when were the amended maps actually posted to the Monroe County Legislature website?
They were posted on the 10th. Not exactly sure on the time, but it was, I want to say before lunch, but I'm not 100% positive on that.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And another question for you, if I could, through the president. As such, were these maps then available to members of this body as promised and to the general public?
I would say yes, they were.
Thank you. I also want to state for the record that the amended statistics were also posted on December 10th at roughly the same time. I pulled them up later, sometime later that afternoon or early evening, and the statistics were there along with the 29 individual maps. One last question through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Fusco. Mr. Fusco, could you please explain the relevant points for the current motion regarding adoption of these maps, as well as any comments regarding what you just heard? For example, does this map comply with the new state law regarding redistricting that Governor Hochul signed in late October? Does it adhere to the Voting Rights Act, et cetera?
Thank you, Mr. Hebert, and through you, Mr. President. The proposal before this legislature is in fact designed to bring Monroe County into compliance with the relevant portions of state and federal law regarding countywide reapportionment. To the point you just alluded to, Mr. Hebert, on about October 27th of this year, the governor signed into law Chapter 516 of the laws of 2021, which provides in relevant part that no county shall supersede any state law which relates to the division of any county into districts for the purposes of reapportionment. That became, for all intents and purposes, with its immediate effective date, the supreme law of the land when it comes to reapportionment. The state law gives us guidelines in that some of the relevant differences from previous state law are that now the maximum deviation for populations between any two districts are 5%, in that no two districts may have a population that deviates more than 5% from each other. Further, that these districts shall not abridge the equal opportunity of racial or language minority groups to participate in the political process. Further, that the district shall consist of contiguous territory and shall be in as compact a form as possible. Further, that the legislature shall not draw maps to discourage competition or promote certain candidates or certain parties, and that districts shall be formed so as to promote the orderly and efficient administration of elections. To that end, this proposal, via its amended form on December the 9th, follows that state law, follows the Federal Voting Rights Act and the principle of one person, one vote. And the amended version takes into account the cores of districts and the comments that have been made from the public and from the individual legislators, so as to put forth as unified of a map as possible. And so I would just say in sum, to simply readopt the 2010 plan would be to vote in violation of current state law, whereas this proposal would be designed to bring Monroe County into compliance with the supreme law of the land.
So the original maps from last year are break the law. They don't abide by the new law. Is that correct, Mr. Fusco?
President Carbone, it is correct. The maps as they currently sit violate state law. For instance, you have a number of districts in the county of Monroe where the population deviation exceeds the 5% threshold that the state has told this legislature is the law that must be followed. I would even add to that, as a matter of fact, Mr. President, there is one legislative district in this body which actually exceeds the 10% population deviation threshold, not only in violation of the state law before it was changed on October the 27th, but that remains in violation of this county's own charter, which in relevant portions says that no two districts shall deviate by more than 10%. To that end, this proposal not only makes the necessary changes to bring Monroe into compliance or conformity with state law, but also does make a relevant change to the county charter so that the county charter no longer conflicts with state law, no longer reads that there can be a 10% population deviation, but instead reads that the maximum population deviation allowed between two districts would now be 5%.
Thank you for that explanation. Legislator Hebert?
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Fusco. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Mr. President,
Legislator Baines, I
Mr.
was
President,
next. Mr.
Legislator
President,
Flag,
I was next.
I think
Mr. President,
Legislator Mitchell's next. Go ahead, Legislator.
Mr. President, I want to make sure we stay in compliance. I just want to call the question.
Point of order, Mr. President.
What's the
That's
point?
not
of order?
appropriate decorum in this forum.
I don't think Legislator Baines is very much appropriate anytime, but go ahead. We'll ignore it. Legislator.
I
Flag.
called the question on Legislator Boyce's comment.
I call the question.
Legislator Baines, you do not have the floor. Go ahead, Legislator.
Wasn't given it.
I can't hear you.
Mr. President, I call the question.
Do you have a second to call the question?
Legislator Roman, we all know where this is going.
Okay. Roll call vote.
No, that's actually totally unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable that anyone would vote in favor of calling the question after only having one speaker, and that's it. And you're so embarrassed of this to call the question.
Legislator.
If anyone votes in favor of this, ought to be ashamed. Ashamed.
On the call to question, Mr. Brew,
Yes.
I am so ashamed of you, sir.
Mr.
I'm ashamed of
Felder,
you too, Legislator Broth.
I'm glad you're ashamed of me.
Can
Shame for
someone,
you is
can
an
someone
honor.
mute Legislator Bob?
Yeah, go ahead and mute me now. Thank you.
Mr. Felder,
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee,
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer,
Legislator Alcoffer, you might be muted.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello,
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart,
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroff,
Shame.
Mr. Baroff votes no.
I think he abstained. You didn't say yes or no, so it's an abstention. Go ahead.
Mr. Baines,
Shame on you, President Carbone.
Legislator Baines, why don't you have a little decorum? Ernest Flagler Mitchell called the question. Those are the rules.
You can override those rules.
You asking me a question, President Carbone? I had the floor. I yielded it to Legislator Hebert, and then you let your friend Flagler Mitchell jump in.
By asking you a question, I wouldn't give you that much respect. Go ahead, call the.
That's true. No respect from you.
Ms. Boyce. On the call to question,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby,
No.
Mr. Colby votes no. Mr. Delahanty,
No.
Mr. Delahanty votes no. Mrs. DeFlorio,
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
No.
Mr. Dondorfer votes no. Mr. Flagler Mitchell. Mr. Flagler Mitchell? Are you there?
Not even paying attention.
Ms. Hasman?
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert?
Yes. Flagler Mitchell is yes. I'm having a difficulty here.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Mr. Hebert? Are you there, Mr. Hebert?
He's muted.
Mr. Hebert? I will move on. Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keough-Lassie?
Yes.
Mr. Keough-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar?
Is this a vote to call the question?
Yes, it is.
No.
Ms. Lamar votes no. Mr. Mafucci?
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti?
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli?
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman?
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox?
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson? Was that a no, Mr. Udelson?
No.
We'll say that's a no.
Yeah,
Mr.
it's a no.
Yeah, Mr. Udelson says no. President Carbone?
Okay.
President Carbone votes yes. I have 15 to 11 to call the question.
Excuse me, Mr. Hebert votes yes as well. I'm sorry, my microphone appears to have broken. It's a separate mic.
Now, Legislator Brown, so vocal when we follow protocol. Now the argument continues. You can talk now. So all that stuff you said was really not valid.
Got a question?
The quorum?
It's a statement. It's a statement, Legislator.
Oh, I disagree with you.
You do? So you disagree that Legislator Flagler Mitchell can call the question if he wants to?
After one speaker? Yes.
Oh, so you want to change the rules of the legislature? Because
Point
Well,
of
you can
order,
change the
Mr.
rule, actually, so I know what you're talking about. You're the president with the power, sir, not me.
Okay, any discussion on this? Who wants the floor?
Legislator Baines has been
Go
trying to
ahead,
get the floor.
Legislator Baines.
Thank you, President Dr. Carbone. Through you to Mr. Fusco. Are you there, Mr. Fusco?
I am Legislator Baines.
So, Mr. Fusco, you indicated to this honorable body that you're fully available to all of us to access your services via your phone or email. But isn't it true that the only way we can access your services is through the president of this legislature, Dr. Carbone?
Mr. Baines, I would disrespectfully disagree with that. As I had mentioned in the previous meeting last week and have been consistently mentioning, any of the legislators who wish to call, text, email, fax, FaceTime are more than permitted to do so. And as a matter of fact, many of the members of this body have done exactly that and have contacted me directly, not through Mr. President, but rather by themselves directly to my direct line. And I appreciate all of that input and appreciate them reaching out to me, because I think having a discussion with the individual legislators has cleared up any of the confusion or answered and alleviated concerns and questions that those individual members had.
Through you, Mr. President, to Mr. Fusco. You pointed out that we can all watch the video of these meetings, and there is video of these meetings which established the protocol to access your services. I asked the question, of who is permitted to talk to you. And President Dr. Carbone indicated that he must approve those communications. So if my friends on the other side of the aisle were able to access your services, that's great. But it was made clear to us that we were not.
Mr. Baines,
But let's go on to a question, Mr. Fusco, through you, Mr. President. So you indicated on December 9th that you were going to make these maps available to us. And you made them available to us on a website?
No, Mr. Baines, I did not make them available to you through a website. That is not the duty or the obligation of my role in this process. The duty or obligation of my role in this process is to transmit this work to the clerk of this legislature. I don't have a degree in technology or the sophistication to post things to websites. I would still have a flip phone, but for the fact that I was recently purchased an iPhone. So no, I would disagree with that premise. I don't upload anything directly to your county website. I merely transmit documents through the president to the clerk of this legislature.
So through you, Mr. President, to Attorney Fusco. So if you're interacting with an attorney on a matter and that attorney puts it somewhere on the internet, you're expected to go find it? Or do you interact with other parties by emailing them directly or communicating with them directly?
Point of order, Mr. President. I don't understand the relevance of that at all to this, to whether or not we're adopting these maps.
This goes to the issue of whether or not this meeting is even legal. And we didn't have an opportunity earlier to question Mr. Fusco on the question of notice. We received no notice of these maps, nor have we ever seen them in a granular way at a street level.
I agree. Legislator Baines, this is back to the original thing we voted on about the legality of this meeting. I don't think your line of questioning pertains to that. You're back to the original legality of the meeting. And I told you that we have different legal opinions. And if this goes to litigation, a judge will probably decide which group of lawyers was correct. So let's keep the questioning to the matter at hand and not the legality of the meeting, please. Thank you.
Well, then for purposes of expediting the meeting, I will stand down, and I'm excited to vote no on this illegitimate plan. Thank
Legislator
you.
Barnhart.
Legislator Barnhart?
Legislator Barnhart.
Go ahead, Legislator Barnhart.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Through you, President Carbone, to Mr. Fusco, can you describe your the extent of your conversations, how many you may have had with Bernie Iacovangelo?
Point of order.
Who's got the point of order?
Legislator DeFlorio.
Yes, Legislator DeFlorio, what's your point of order?
This meeting is to vote on the amendment. The meeting was called to vote on an amendment for a revised map and a revised amendment to the map. That question is not germane to that vote.
We're voting on the maps, not just the amendment. It's really important that we understand how these maps came to be, that the public understands the process that was used to come up with these maps. And I respectfully think that this matters. Who was in the room to draw those maps, the involvement of other people, who wasn't involved, all of those things are very, very important. And I think my question is relevant.
I'm going to uphold Legislator DeFlorio's point of order. I don't think it's relevant. I think you should be asking about this matter at hand.
This is directly related to the matter at hand. Yeah.
Ask a more pertinent question, please, Legislator Barnhart.
Through the president to Mr. Fusco, it's my understanding that the local law itself has to be posted online. Posting the maps is not posting the local law or giving it to us. We did not receive the local law.
Now
point of order,
Mr. Baines talked about. Now you're talking about the legality of the meeting. And I already said we have different legal opinions. Okay. If this goes to litigation, a judge will decide. Now you're back to questioning the legality of the meeting. And we just had a point of order on that and discontinued that.
Okay, I would just like to explain my vote. And, this is a once in a decade process that has great importance. Redistricting determines the people's representation in this body. It affects their choices when they go vote, and it affects decisions that the legislature will make for many years to come. I'm really disappointed that this was not a true bipartisan collaborative process with all members of the legislature. Instead, it was haphazard, secretive, rushed. These maps could be a lot better if we really did work together. And I am committed to such a process in the future. I will be voting no. Thank you.
Legislator Baroff.
Legislator Baroff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry?
That was a little joke. I thought you were calling the question.
No, I wouldn't do that. I think doing such a thing is terrible. By the way, I would like to apologize for raising my voice. I think I was justifiably upset, but that doesn't make it a good thing to do. When I said shame, I won't apologize for saying that. I think anyone who voted for this made a shameful decision. But I want to explain my vote. Clearly, asking questions is not encouraged right now. But I need to respond to a few things. It was stated that to simply readopt the 2010 map would be in violation of law. Yeah, well, no kidding. Of course it would be. Population has changed. That's why we do redistricting. It's a red herring. The discussion between Mr. Fusco and Mr. Hebert had quite a few red herrings in it. We're talking about when was the map received and when the map was posted. Irrelevant. Municipal local law talks about local law. So it was a red herring. I don't really want to go into that. But what I do want to say is, as a member of the redistricting commission, I've been involved in watching, certainly not being involved in doing anything since October.
Mr. President, I'm going to call the question again.
I'm still having the floor, and I'm actually explaining my vote. Let's say right.
I don't know the rule for that. If somebody's got the floor and somebody calls the question.
She doesn't have the floor to call the question.
It's still Legislator Baroff.
Okay, Legislator Baroff, I'm sorry. I didn't know the rule. I follow the rules. Go ahead.
Religiously, I can tell. Anyhow, we've never met as a commission to do anything in terms of meaningful discussion. And in fact, we didn't even have unmeaningful discussions. We just didn't meet. We barely advertised to the public when we were having hearings. And then when we did it on the day of, and you only did it at my urging. The maps were never shared in any interactive way. There was no way for people to look interactive with the map. They had to go and figure it out on their own, a very cumbersome process. There are two clear-cut processes of evidence of gerrymandering. When the commission was presented with a map that was somehow revised the night before, not from public comment, but from some secret person. And then again, we had a map amendment at the last meeting where all the changes were made to suit the needs of individuals. Had nothing to do with legality, certainly had nothing to do with uniting neighborhoods or not splitting up things, because that certainly didn't happen. The paperwork itself, the law was not provided to us in a timely fashion. And finally, this final product seems to have been designed to ignore and contradict just about every piece of testimony we heard throughout this process. There is no way I can, in any good conscience, vote for this map. I will not. And I would urge, because, well, I'm going to be out of office in about, I don't know, 13 days or so. I would urge this body to do better moving forward. That's why I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Baroff.
Legislator Hebert.
Legislator Hebert.
Yes, sir. Given the nature of the latest discussion, I would like to call the question at this point.
Second that, Legislator Dondorfer.
Okay, we've got another motion to call the question. Roll call vote.
On the call to question, Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Now, you know why Legislative Flagler Mitchell did it. Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Baroth.
I'm not satisfied we're done, so no.
Mr. Baroth votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
I think the Dems had their chance to talk, so I'll vote yes this time.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahanty.
Yes.
Mr. Delahanty votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keophit-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keophit-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. Mr. Mafucci.
I would have liked to have said something, so no.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti.
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman.
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor.
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox.
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson.
No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone.
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. 20-9. Call the question passes. Now on the local law as amended to adopt. Mr. Brew.
Yes.
Mr. Brew votes yes. Mr. Felder.
Yes.
Mr. Felder votes yes. Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Alcoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Alcoffer votes yes. Mr. Ansello.
Yes.
Mr. Ansello votes yes. Ms. Barnhart.
No.
Ms. Barnhart votes no. Mr. Broth.
No.
Mr. Broth votes no. Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Baines votes no. Ms. Boyce.
Yes.
Ms. Boyce votes yes. Mr. Colby.
Yes.
Mr. Colby votes yes. Mr. Delahanty.
Yes.
Mr. Delahanty votes yes. Mrs. DeFlorio.
Yes.
Mrs. DeFlorio votes yes. Mr. Dondorfer.
Yes.
Mr. Dondorfer votes yes. Mr. Flagler Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Flagler Mitchell votes yes. Ms. Hasman.
No.
Ms. Hasman votes no. Mr. Hebert.
Yes.
Mr. Hebert votes yes. Mr. Keller.
Yes.
Mr. Keller votes yes. Mr. Keophit-Lassie.
Yes.
Mr. Keophit-Lassie votes yes. Ms. Lamar.
Legislator Lamar, I think you might be muted.
Legislator Lamar? I will come back to her. Mr. Mafucci?
No.
Mr. Mafucci votes no. Mr. Marinetti?
Yes.
Mr. Marinetti votes yes. Mr. Morelli?
No.
Mr. Morelli votes no. Ms. Roman?
No.
Ms. Roman votes no. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Smith votes yes. Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor votes yes. Mr. Wilcox?
No.
Mr. Wilcox votes no. Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Wright votes yes. Mr. Udelson?
No.
Mr. Udelson votes no. President Carbone?
Yes.
President Carbone votes yes. And then we'll try Ms. Lamar one more time.
Yes.
Ms. Lamar votes yes. 20-9, local law passes.
There being no unfinished business, Legislator Brew.
Yes, Mr. President, this legislative meeting stands adjourned, sine die.